for Intel, obviously one of the things we are known for is advanced process technology. We do, obviously fab most of our own parts. And so that's IP typically that, we can't get from outside. So that type of IP, we're building. There are other cases where, there's, as I mentioned, I think there are some cases where we are a big part of the standards body. We actually are a big enough player that we really want to influence the standard, and in some of those cases we build for that reason. So those are a couple of reasons.
So I can chip in here. I think that if you look company malware, right, early days, we kind of focus a certain area, right? We kind of company basically start with technology. So that's why we always see technological differentiation. So sometimes IP we do see available, but as previously I talked, so many concern there, legal concern, also. So that's why we tend, especially tend to build most IP. But of course, IP already say we can do it. Right? For some, we have the technology strength normally we build. For example, some IP just like certain IP more too complicated, like standard evolving. Sometimes also different usage. Only one chip use, two chip use it don't worthwhile for your this license. So that's why it's really judgment call is so important. But fundamentally, certain IP, because also our products so diversified, like we now why we build PCIe or high-speed SerDes, because we have the high-end switching product. We have hundreds of port SerDes, 12 gig or 20 gigs. This is long license. If the license the size too big, they're not competitive.
So we see customers sometimes building their own IP when it's the analog side of things. They have their own fab or their own process technology. That is a motivator for them to do that themselves. On the digital side, I think there's very, particularly standards-based digital IP, there's very little reason to do that, to build your own, unless, as you're pointing out, that you're actually the driver of the standard. And but if you just need that IP, then it makes much more sense to buy the digital IP. In standards-based, maybe you can comment on this, but in standards-based IP, everybody's joining the standards body. And when you join the standards body, you have to agree to a certain legal structure that's set by that standards body. So I think potentially there's less room for litigation in that context as well.
One of the things I was involved in library licensing 15 years ago now. One of the issues there was people wanted things really, really quickly, and then the lawyers would get involved, and then all of the time that you needed to sort of your lead time for getting these library licenses was sort of consumed in getting the contracts done. So is there any advice you have on how to make that go more smoothly when you license IP, so that the lawyers don't consume all your product schedule?
Yeah, I think the time you spend with lawyers is still much less than develop your own IP. Right? So I think why it takes sometimes it takes so much time because there are so many back and forth between the two parties. There are many issues, and we need to consider, and we need do some due diligence. For example, when you just give you a simple example, when you license IP to another company, right? There's so many issues you need to consider, what if this company is acquired by another company? Are you automatically licensed, to that? The company that acquired that company, right? And for example, what that company, the licensee, combine the IP with its own IP, and the combination infringe somebody's patents, what's this consequence? What's the liability? There are so many issues, so and for all these issues we need back and forth, discuss with the other side, how to resolve that. I think that's why it takes so much time.
So you're in the IP licensing business. Do you have a
Yes.
sort of standard contract that doesn't require so much sort of?
Yes, we do. And it's, it's been negotiated a lot of times, and it's pretty clean. So generally, there's not a lot of issue. There's some issues usually, but from my experience in these things, I think it's a practical piece of advice for getting through a license negotiation of this type in the simplest way is to differentiate clearly between the business issues and the legal issues, right? So there's certain class of decisions have to be made about the business issues where, from a legal point of view, you might want to consider every possible thing that might happen. From a business case, you're going to think about the things that are most likely to happen and you really care about. Then there's the legal issues like indemnification, for example. And when I come to those sorts of things, then I like to get the lawyers from the two teams just talking to each other directly and get the business people out of it. Because in that case, the business people really are probably just going to mess things up and make it more difficult. The lawyers have, long history of negotiating those things and can generally get to an answer relatively quickly. So that's a practical approach I've stumbled on over the years.
Have to speed it up. So, questions from you guys? Any of you got questions for these people about IP licensing, legal issues, contracts? Yeah. We have a microphone for low budget microphone.
Hello, my name is Georgia. For technology point of view, I think the most important innovation was the web browser. The first version of Mosaic web browser, which was released 20 years ago, 1993. At that time, Mark Andreessen was a student intern in University of Illinois. I was a postdoc at Purdue University, so I learned this project very well. So they came to Purdue University campus to present seminar. But after that, I couldn't see any significant technology innovation in past 20 years, except the 4 patents I filed in 1999 and then 2000, which made NASDAQ jump from 1,500 to 5,000, and then back to the 3,500 again. I guess you are lawyers at patent. Have you ever seen anything significant innovations in technology point of view, and which is significant in both technology and economics? What is the most important innovation in past 20 years after that?
Smartphones look pretty good.
I think, smartphones are the thing that's going to change, so many people's lives in the world, and
Technology is like digital camera, like Apple technology, giant magnetic system, and that's all the back to 1988, and after that,
I think that's part of the challenge, though. It takes a long, from the time that the technology is developed, sometimes to the time where it really is changing everybody's life can be a very long time. And so the inventions probably happened, and we probably don't know yet that it's going to make a huge difference because it hasn't been commercialized yet or hasn't been productized yet. So I think it's probably too early for us to know, what were the giant things that are brewing in the labs in the last, 10 or 20 years.
The semiconductor technology has this sort of aspect that it gets better if you wait a little bit longer. So often these things, it's like you could have built a smartphone 20 years ago, it would just cost $1 million and occupied a room this size, so it wouldn't be terribly interesting. And now it fits in your pocket. But the graphics power in your smartphone is more than when Andy and I were at Velasite Technology. One of our investors was Everton Sutherland, and they built multi-million-dollar flight simulators that have far less graphics power than you have in your pocket today.
So for instance, one of the speakers talked about Moore's law, And you know, Moore's law is enabling more and more of this to happen, right? You can integrate more, you've got better performance, lower power, and the amount of innovation and invention that has to keep happening in semiconductor technology to enable us to keep going is enormous, and it's only getting more and more challenging. So again, you know, something like FinFET, right? It doesn't, it's not user visible in a way, but it's what's keeping the technology going. So I think there are a lot of things like that, like Paul said, where the progress has to keep going, and there's huge innovation to make that happen, but maybe it's not a visible event like a web browser.
Yeah, I think it's more a combination of these things. It's not just one single thing that's going to change the world, but the combination of all these things being pulled together in new ways. You know, so the smartphone is one thing that's being pulled together. The other interesting area in which there's a lot of work going on now is machine learning, and having, you know, so with all this computer power, how do you apply this to different kinds of things? So like facial recognition, self-driving cars. You know, I went to a robotic. It was the automotive robotics talk happened to be held at an Intel facility, and you know, they talked about, there was some people from Google who were involved with Google Car talking about all the ways that a self-driving car could change society. Like, you don't need any parking lots. You could live anywhere you want and just drive to work because you're sitting in your car doing your work, and then you get there finally and you say goodbye to the car and it goes and recharges, or you know, until you, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of things that are moving on, but this ability to take these, you know, this processing power that we now have and apply it to algorithms that can do things that only humans could do a little while ago is probably going to be a huge change over the next few years.
Maybe just adding to what Andrew said, I think the sort of ability of those devices to know about the environment and sort of the sensors and the awareness of the environment is going to be a big change, because then it goes from just being a little version of the computer you had to something that knows a lot more about the context of where you're using that device and what you're trying to do, and you know, can actually deliver different experiences because it knows where it's being used and so on.
Okay. Scale up microphone here, since we don't think I have.
I have a question for both Artisan and Intel. Nowadays, by the way, my name is Ralph Chen from CASPA. Nowadays, as you see, the product cycle is short, and also a simple device like a cell phone contain a lot of functionalities. My question is, in my opinion, actually the IP business is getting tougher and tougher because, number one, you have to forecast as an IP provider. You have to forecast what the market need, number one, right? And then number two, people nowadays ask for proven IP because, you know, the mask is so expensive, okay? So, but the value is in the fact that the IP already verified. So my question is, how can you predict the market so that you can provide what the market look for, especially a lot of the standard keep changing. So this is one question. I may follow up with the second for Intel.
Okay, so we're in the standards bodies. So the standards bodies are made up of the end users. So for example, the MIPI Alliance has got over 200 companies in it today, but the core companies that are at the working groups, are Qualcomm, Samsung, Apple, Intel, Toshiba, etc. Ourselves, so we're the small guy in this great thing. But so once you have a standard, so all of those guys are going to be building chips. So they in fact define what they need, and most of the time they get it right. Sometimes they get it they're a little bit off, right? But most of the time they get it right, and then the standard keeps going. So when we start, so our product roadmaps are, we're all in on CSI. So we're going to keep doing the CSI 2, the CSI 3, 3.1, 3.2. So part of the product planning is based on the selection of what are the good markets, and then the interesting part then becomes what's going to change. So there is, there's potential. You have to look at potential change points. So for today, potential change points are this UFS versus eMMC. How's that going to work? And There are some others. There's like EDP, for example. There's been a big change in the PC business, with EDP becoming the graphic standard. And a logical question will be, will that impinge on the standards that are used in the mobile market at all? But, at some place, it grades across. You have a tablet, you have a PC, you have a laptop, you have a tablet.
Crossover.
Is there a crossover and is there penetration? So the only way to do that is to talk to customers and keep your ears tuned, because there's sort of a chicken and egg thing. There's no penetration until there's penetration, right? So everybody stands around and asks the question, is it going to happen, until somebody takes the first step. And then suddenly there's a direction and you can start to follow it.
So what you're saying that you have, number one, you have to have inside information kind of in the inner circle, so that you get first-hand information and also get a feel of the market trend, so that you can prepare your product.
Yeah, effectively, right. So you have to be involved in the standards bodies where you know what's going on, and you have to have a strong customer base that you can go talk to about these things and understand what their needs are.
Thank you. Yeah, that's why I feel that it's very, very, very intensive work on the provider. Second question for Intel. Intel want to license Atom, right, as an IP. Atom processor.
Not as IP, they want to build your chips.
Oh well, I mean just like IP in the sense. Well, this is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's almost like ARM, like I don't know.
There hasn't been any sort of public
Oh, so it is not. Yeah, the reason why I asked that is Intel has the manufacturing capability, right? And my question then is, will Intel license its own IP then, if not Atom? Like for example, like even NVIDIA license their IP.
So I think most of you are aware that Intel is building a foundry business, and we have made some announcements publicly. The biggest customer so far is Altera. Up till now, it's been fairly restrictive as to the types of companies we're working with. So they've been sort of in complementary segments. One of the things that Brian Krzanich, who took over as CEO in May, has stated is that we would be open to different models, I think, and his intention is to grow that business. So again, this is certainly not any sort of official statement, but I think he would be open to look at those types of scenarios if the right customer came and the right business deal could be made.
Yes, I just have a curious about a question. Legal IP, and do you mean if it's not legal IP, they're illegal?
No.
Could you explain that?
No, I don't mean that. Legal IP, I just mean legal perspective, in legal sense, the IP in legal sense. The IP we talk about, like the lawyers work with patents, trade secrets. We call it IP, but those IP are different from the IP these guys talking about.
We stole the word. Before the word semiconductor IP and libraries and blocks and things,
Yeah.
IP meant patents.
Yeah,
intellectual
because-
property
yeah.
was patents, basically, or copyright.
That's right. Yeah. When we talk about intellectual property, we just talk about patents, trademark, copyrights, trade secrets, but
But the semiconductor.
Yeah,
world,
but
we
IP is-
stole the language. We stole the language.
the word is used in silicon IP, that it's different.
My name is everyone. I have a quick question. Now, you talk about these IPs and they only acquired from someone or developed by yourself, but there's a third choice, which is the open source. Can you guys comment on this open source? This open source software is already very, very successful. You look at Android because they're Linux based. But hardware now, I can see there's some trend that you can do a CPU from open source peripherals and stuff like that. So can you guys comment on this option? The open source hardware.
there are certain, there's open source hardware has been around for a long time, but it's a very, very small part of the market. There's certain classes, there's some kinds of processors, for example, and other things you can get, and I think there's websites where you can go and get things. But, for example, if you want to do a MIPI standard, you need to join the MIPI organization and pay the fees, and you need to be a legal entity to do that, and to join this and agree to the terms of participating in that organization. So, and part of the terms is that it's not going to be open source, right? So, so there's large classes of very interesting IP that are just sort of not accessible to the open source community. It's different than in the software space, which has been incredibly useful and successful. But I don't see any trends which are going to make that a difference in hardware.
Also, another software hardware difference. Right? Software you can verify immediately with hardware your chip, right? The consequence, if you like this, if the IP not very fully verified, the common case, the country is very huge. If like some IP today is like robot, right? It's not just IP alone. We have like a very sophisticated, all computer verification system to make sure IP really, first of all, it's a quality, also interoperability. That's our standard. So open source, you get some IP, how do you know? Now even the analog IP gives to you, right? It is still verified. So that's why it's different from software. It become like cost-wise. If you develop your own, you better maybe give you a starting point.
Open source tends to be relatively slow to get, right? There are no open source games, right? Because by the time a game is a hit, it's too late to play. And with all these very fast changing standards, we have that same problem, which is, if you wanted to build a USB 2.0 flop, then you could probably do that open source, but nobody cares about that anymore. What they really want is the latest standards.
I have a question for the pricing. Now, if I am a customer of IP, I want to buy a piece of IP, how can I judge the value of this IP from either point of view, from suppliers, IP suppliers' point of view, or from the IP customer point of view? What kind of factors should I take into consideration in order to value this IP? Because the IP normally is not a commodity, right? So it's very kind of a custom-made or proprietary. Even IP based on standards, different technology, different implementation, so it requires different expertise. So how to value the IPs?
Well, there's competitive markets for almost all IP. So there's sort of two ways to look at it. It's a make versus buy. You need to look at, what would it take me to do to make this? And the argument I was making in my presentation is that there's a huge range of technologies and things that you have to be competent at to build IP today. And and many companies can, well, not many companies, some companies can do it, but it's very expensive. And I think as the other participants are saying, you have to have really good strategic reasons to do that. For IP that for which there are multiple suppliers, then I'd say it's pretty much like any other any other marketplace that's like EDA, for example, is the same way. All the companies have price lists, but we don't publish our price lists on the internet, right? So it's not a public commodity like a consumer good. Excuse me. So you need to start to assess the suppliers. The reason that that's the case is that there's a lot of factors, that need to be, considered in a relationship, right? So as you pointed out, many times, customers come to us even for standard-based IP, and they want something a little bit different. They want the FIFOs to be bigger. Or they want something else which doesn't affect the standard itself, but it affects how it's going to be integrated into their system and the performance it's going to have in their system. And that's something that it can affect the price and delivery and so forth. So you know, so it's a marketplace, you gotta do your homework in, as opposed to, you know, searching the web for the best phone price or something.
I think a couple of the things to think about is, you know, are you going to use that IP sort of as is, or are you going to want to go back and ask for changes? Because if you are, you better be prepared to pay a lot of NRE for those changes. And, you know, some companies are better than others at using things as is without going back and requesting a lot of changes. I think another thing that would complicate the situation are those few cases where there's royalty involved, because then you're not just looking at your own development cost, you're trying to determine, am I getting some sort of, you know, ASP benefit from having this IP in there, because that's a different, that's a per unit product cost then. So.
The other piece is, what you call it, just you buy the IP, right, multi-supply. This is the standard IP, what interoperability. It also depends on what your usage, your goal. For example, if your IP, let's say, if you have something only used for closed system, you don't talk to many people, you know what you talk about. You can get some IP maybe not as stringent. If you build some source bridge, you talk to everybody. Any corner device didn't pass. That IP quality is different. That also depends on the price also comes in. So that's why business world is really you have to know what you're doing, what you need. So it's the price wise. When you license from some like Synopsys or Cadence, this is only of some company IP proven. It's definitely expensive. Like USB 3 controller, you go to NEC or whoever, this kind of controller very expensive. So this is a judgment call yourself also, and you find the reference point. Like say, it's B2B market. No, not open market where you can talk about them.
So I think you just made a good distinction between, you know, if you have a, you know, a closed channel, you know what you're talking to on both ends of the channel. That makes it much easier. You know, it makes selection easier. Makes maybe the make-buy decision might lean more to make in that case. If once you have a standard like, you know, the SD eMMC standard those standards that we support. So we're the leading guy in that space, and so when you plug an SD card in something, there's a good chance you're plugging it into one of our controllers. And if you need to make sure that any SD card in the world plugs into your device and works, then you have to have very high confidence that that piece of IP has been tested against almost every other piece of SD in the world. And you know, that's a very expensive proposition. It's something that we've invested in and continue to invest in.
Just to follow on from that, Andrew, you said earlier about IP going to being more analog and mixed signal. And I've been working in the mixed signal simulation space for a long time, trying to support IP reuse flows for more analog stuff, and there's been absolutely no movement in the tools in the last decade to support that. So how much of this IP reuse market is a tools problem?
Is it a tools problem? No, well, the analog tools, certainly, you know, the advance in analog tools has been nowhere near as advanced as rapid as in the digital side. That's
I wouldn't say there was any advance in digital.
No advance at all. Okay, so I don't think that's connected to the use of analog in the IP. You know, that's being driven by the need for low power, right? So people are moving to high speed, low power, and so but the number of people who can design analog in any shape or form is quite small, right? So you have to rely. So there, the choice of buying is much stronger because analog teams are scarce.
I was thinking more of the obstacles to selling the stuff. So I worked for TCI for a while, and they sell PLLs, but they sell you a SPICE netlist, which is basically their IP. So they do all their deals up front to get the business agreement before they'll give you anything, where if you had the flow where you could give away behavioral models and black box descriptions, you could hand that out without worry. But that's not supported currently. I mean, at the moment, I think the only thing you can do is go to the cloud where people can't see what they're dealing with. You can black box it, but you can use the same crappy tools you currently have.
Mm. Yeah, the analog IP that we're dealing with is usually has multiple subsystems and has digital components as well. So You know, like the MIPI M5 is pretty complicated, fine. And so, you know, we have the IP for that, and we have models that people can use once they license. But, you know, those are not available ahead of time.
But also, you're going back to the open source question. I mean, how much is the licensing cost for doing a simulation of something like that IP going to be? Because you're going to have a bunch of different simulators currently. I mean, how much of this business is just going to go to the cloud if there's open source support for managing it and just getting your money on the IP use at the back end?
Is that a
together. So that gives me a very good view of the in that area in terms of what Cadence provide. I wonder, do we have similar category in the IP area? In other words, what are the top challenges that could really ignite? Let's say a high school student getting into this talk would think, okay, I want to focus on that because that's, you know, one of the toughest problems in the industry. Nobody has been solving that, because that's going to ignite the dreams of the younger generation and have people focus on that. And this actually a question also from this gentleman talked about earlier, that although that's just his personal perception, but on the other hand, I think that there's certain truth in that. Innovation really comes from areas of difficulties, or people perceive difficulties. So I wonder, you know, from the landscape perspective, what are the top areas? I just don't know. This might be something everybody knows already, since everybody else assumes in the semiconductor industry. So from the, just an analogy, in the software area, in software industry, you would have the functionality, and also you have the non-function area. For example, functionality, everybody knows what the software does, but in the non-functional area, the challenge is pretty much in the scalability, performance, security, extensibility. All those non-functional areas, they are actually very challenging, even though given a simple software solution. I wonder whether this same systematic view apply in the semiconductor industry as well. Anyway, just a landscape question, so that people can have a dream and to work toward.
Well, I have some thoughts on it. So, you know, one, in big picture markets, certainly the smartphone market is the key opportunity space for that we see, right? So that's, you know, it's a class of market. But you're asking a technical question about where I think where a software person might think about concentrating. And I think, you know, when I look across what our business, you know, constitutes our business, you know, internally, then this analog design process that we're just talking about here is a critical area. There are very few analog designers in the world. It's complicated. The tools, you know, haven't advanced. And if there were advancements in that would be a tremendous asset, because in addition to all everything that's been said about the lack of progress there, the process technologies, you know, that are going with FinFETs and so forth are just throwing up a whole new class of problems, you know, for those designers that nobody's ever faced before. So that would be one area where, you know, somebody came up with really great analog design tools. That would be a huge breakthrough.
I'm on a question. So I can see, like, getting your question to this IP, right? IP that is running through challenge like this, getting complicated, because people want to squeeze everything. So first of all, each side, the verification is complicated. But then you have a standard methodology to getting there. What Andrew talked about, the analog portion, is really, we still have a lot of room for innovation there. Just like at the beginning I mentioned, for people interested in area, you need a small investment just because people say analog is art. You really, you don't normally say, you cannot say which one's best. Sometimes simple things is best. You don't build very complex things to achieve some function. You just build few transistors, you can achieve the function. That's the beauty of analog portion. So those areas is a lot of creativity there. Like today, Jiang, presenter already talked about how to things are coming down, the power, all this. Today, we do analog IP, we still talk about innovation. A lot of IP, people also talk IP reuse. Regularity is very hard to reuse because people just like, and always people innovation, things to do better. Also inside. It's a lot. Everyone can do it. You can make a difference. That's why a lot of other guys they're looking different. They don't understand the methodology. You can do this. They have certain tool, but a lot of things they're creative.
We've got time for one more question, I think.
Oh, am I the lucky last one?
Yeah, you're the lucky last one.
Right. Earlier, Bill mentioned protection of your IP. And this let me think about a unique perspective maybe some of you can address, which is how, in your past experience, how do you think about the best way to protect the IP in your library? Give us some perspective. And also come from that, since this is a CASPA, a lot of listeners right now has a home country in another side of the Pacific Ocean. And some of us may already think about the opportunities there, which means all the great innovators, almost every one of them first worked for somebody, and they left and created their own company, and some of them become big and become a leader. And I can only imagine their big ideas must already brewed when they actually still getting other people's paycheck, but they withhold or something, then they quit and form their own company and develop their own idea. That's one way. But there are, of course, other ways, which is maybe not so legal ways. As China's development path is already very clear, they want to introduce cooperation, but the meaning behind the cooperation has some kind of encouragement for talents from other entities to work for them, either officially or unofficially. So maybe Bill can also talk about how to educate us not to fall into some traps later will cause legal drama.
That's a very good question. We do see a lot of bad examples that people quit their job and start their own company, and after a couple years, when their own company grow pretty good, and they just get sued by their former employers for like trade secret misappropriation or infringement of patents. And that litigation can be like very, very critical to that startup company. I have seen like a couple companies just give up because they cannot afford to litigate. And actually, if you pay attention to legal issues in the beginning when you started the company, you can avoid all these issues like very easily. Just a few simple things you should absolutely not do. That is don't take any confidential information of your former employee, right? Because they are all protected, and if you take anything, and eventually you may get caught up. And physical confidential information, including like physical information like paper, or electronic information like source code. And also the confidential knowledge you gain from your former employee. Absolutely, cannot take anything. But your experience and your common knowledge, you accumulated throughout these years you work, that can be you can take anywhere for free. That's okay. And so that's one thing everybody try to start their own company absolutely need to pay attention to. Otherwise, after a couple of years, you will find that all the work you have done is just in vain, and probably you cannot continue business. We just had a litigation like a couple of years ago, and one employee just take like maybe 100 lines of source code. and he didn't intentionally to take anything. He just, you know, and like when he was working, like 10 years ago maybe, he just emailed the source code to his own email account so he can work on the source code when, you know, he get home. Because at that time, you know, we didn't have like, you know, a share folder, share drive. You can like, you know, Google Drive sort of thing. You can log in remote. You have to email to yourself, and then you can work from the whole computer. So he just emailed back to himself, and then so he can work from home. And after 10 years, oh, he remembered, oh, I had that source code, so I can use it on my new project. And then that minor source code can cause a lot of you know, issues. Yeah, I won't, you know, disclose that. But yeah, that is very bad. And but that can be easily avoided. And right, and that 100 source code actually only maybe take you 1 hour to write it. Just pay attention to these, you know, issues.
Okay. We're done.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Liang is going to present the appreciation plaque to each of the panelists and the moderator. All right, so that will conclude our symposium, and thanks everybody to spend the Saturday weekend with us. Thanks for coming.